Um, all right, guys, welcome back. Today we are talking about movie villains and the concepts of what makes a good villain and the evolution of how villains have changed over time through different decades and different movies and different genres. Here with Sam today. Sam, do you want to tell the people what you do, where you're from,
Oh
what you're
my
doing in
goodness.
life right now?
I live currently in Greenville, South Carolina, and I am a nightclub bouncer. I am trying to get a company started over here, and I've been working towards a bodybuilding show for these past couple months. So always something new.
That's right.
Very excited to be here talking about movies, one of my favorite things with Joe.
um, yeah. So the first kind of question I wanted to ask you, Sam, is like, and what we can talk about is like what. So in order to talk about a villain, we need to talk about what makes a actual good villain. So what concepts make a good villain?
Yes, and I was actually looking this up as I was sitting in the DMV today.
Nice.
It was the idea of what is the difference between a villain and an antagonist?
Mm,
By their literary definitions, a villain and an antagonist, one is not the other. A villain is an antagonist, but an antagonist is not always necessarily a villain. I think a great example was a villain is one who makes decisive decisions with malicious intent, truly causing harm against goodness or the protagonist himself. So,
yeah.
for an example of that, you would say that Sauron and the Joker are villains. They're actively making malicious decisions.
Yeah.
However, the guy in the Karate Kid, he's not a
Hmm.
villain. He's just an antagonist. But
Right.
the importance of the villain, in this case, the villain, not the antagonist, both of them do it, but to villains to which we talk, they create the tension by which the hero's journey is measured against as we watch the narrative. Without an antagonistic villain, we really won't have the narrative's intention we have and enjoy as movie viewers.
Yeah. I completely agree. What you were saying about like the Joker and with Sauron, one thing that I've always noticed with Sauron, Vader, Joker, the screen time doesn't even matter, you know? I mean, there is very little screen time, especially if we're talking about Sauron. He's physically on screen for probably
The
15
7
minutes of the
seconds, yeah.
not even like so like so how does one like be, in a villain movie sense, how do they with such little screen time make such a big impact?
That's so good. And I was looking at the primary differences between Darth Vader and Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that it narrowed down to was respect.
Yeah.
You respect these villains, and as a result of that respect, it doesn't mean you condone them, but it does mean that you truly dread their competencies to make cruel decisions.
Yeah.
Kylo Ren showed himself as a villain that would give to outbursts, and it wasn't dialed in, and it wasn't always thought through. He was a very emotional character, and as a result of that, I didn't take him as seriously as I take Darth Vader, who is
Yeah.
calculated
Yeah.
and cold. When you lose respect for your villain, tension drops.
Yeah. I was watching that video, which I know you love, the Critical Drinker, and I'm sure you were talking about this and referring to that when he's talking about Kylo Ren versus Darth Vader, and how Kylo Ren. I remember within the first like 30 minutes of meeting him, he actually is a pretty cool villain. He seems to be a pretty there's a lot of high hopes for what he was going to do in response to having Darth Vader, and it's when he starts to emotionally become childish. He
Yeah.
starts to just outlandishly. Um, his dialogue is terrible. I think writing is a huge part. I think the biggest part of making a good villain is the writing and the dialogue they have. Think about how iconic Joker's lines are. Without the writing that is given to Joker, yes, the acting is great and that makes a huge part. But if it's a bad writing, it's never going to be a good villain. I think writing is far more important than acting.
it's something really fascinating when you talk about acting and a different array of villains. You look at Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the fifth one?
Mm-hmm.
There are four antagonists, and that I would say are villains. There are four different villains in that movie who all take a different anatomy. You
Yeah.
have Bellatrix Lestrange, who's truly a psychopath.
Yeah.
She's a murderous psychopath. You have Voldemort, who is a cunning and cold murderer who has a power-hungry darkness to him.
Yeah.
You also have Lucius Malfoy, who, as a villain, is this emotionally detached, very heartless human being.
Mm-hmm.
But then, in a form that you don't usually think of a villain being, you have Dolores Umbridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dolores Umbridge is a villain in her own right for her cruelty and lack of any kind of compassion
Right.
and the active choices to oppress
Right.
the students through that year. And so you look at that and it's like, that's cool because I can't name a story where there are four independent villains that are all very different from each other.
That's a really good point. I didn't think about Harry Potter when I was thinking about this. I thought about Voldemort, but in that sense, yeah.
Those are four good villains
They are.
in one movie.
They absolutely are. Now, to get like a benchmark of what we want to go with here, I'll ask you first, and then what do you think is who do you think is the greatest villain of all time?
Well, you can measure the strength of a villain because it is such a reward for us to watch the hero overcome it.
Yeah.
The main point of writing a villain is to show the hero overcoming a trial.
Yeah.
And the greater the villain, the greater the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean on a cosmic scale. I'm not just going to say Thanos.
Right.
Thanos killed 50% of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. I mean, look what the Joker did in Dark Knight that made Bruce Wayne. Look what Bruce Wayne had to overcome.
Right.
Because of the Joker's decisions. I wonder. So if I would measure a villain by what he makes the protagonists overcome to defeat him, I mean, Sauron is such a great.
Yeah.
Like, look what he does to Middle Earth, but look how much Middle Earth grows
And
as in character to beat him.
And to have the significance of a villain to stretch over 3-hour long movies and to have the same impact by the end of the third as it is the beginning of the first, I think that speaks volumes for sure.
That's really something. And then, it's, I don't want to be too cliche and say the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia because, Aslan does incredible things to overcome the witch, but I would have to say the sacrifices that the Fellowship has to make in Lord of the Rings is pretty incredible for the sake of a dreadful villain. But I mean, and I was thinking about this last week as I was thinking about talking with you. What made Darth Vader such an intriguing villain was that you knew because of Luke and Luke's faith, you knew Vader might actually have a chance to be redeemed.
Yeah.
Which makes him, you're constantly watching, and with the value of knowing the prequels, your heart is also broken for Anakin Skywalker at the same time. That complexity makes an incredibly sympathetic villain. And if you watched the Clone Wars, any of you, if you got really nerdy like me, you'd find out that Darth Maul is also an incredibly sympathetic villain with incredible arcs.
Right. So do you have like a definite answer, or are you still like, don't know?
Yeah, I'd ambiguously say, it's a mix between Lord of the Rings. I mean, the Joker pushes Batman to a long degree, but I know I'd like to think about that, I guess, more before I had to answer it.
We can answer at the end.
Talk
about it more then. But I think what you said is really interesting about the emotional impact with villains. Like, there are villains, I think of Davy Jones as one of those villains.
Oh, yeah, what a good one.
Has an extremely emotional arc with him and, what's her name?
Calypso.
Thank you, yes.
Theodoma.
Yeah, and then you said Vader as well. Like, obviously, people who watched this, watched the 70s and 80s ones didn't know the emotional impact, but with the emotional understanding we have of Anakin, do you think an emotional impact increases the greatness of a villain? Because there's also villains like the Joker in the Dark Knight. If you just watch the Dark Knight trilogy, we don't get a backstory of the villain of Joker. Same with, I don't know. Same with like Puss in Boots in The Last Wish. I think of Death. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Death is
Yeah, that was
incredible.
really good.
We don't have
And
any backstory or emotional impact.
so this leads into something that we have in modern day writing, which we are entering into this postmodern world where truth and objective morality, everyone would like to say it's gray.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they're pushing one of those, I would call it an agenda, is by making the classic Disney villains have wildly sympathetic backstories, and it makes you question your own prejudice about thinking that Cruella de Vil or Jafar or Maleficent. It's like, oh my goodness, she's not evil. I'm just a prejudiced movie watcher who thought she was evil.
Okay.
And so, dude, did that work on me? No, it didn't. But here's the thing: just because you gave them an emotional backstory doesn't mean that it made me invest more.
Right.
Because you telling me and subverting my expectations of a villain didn't make me like the villain more.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have Anakin into Darth Vader. You'd say, well, Samuel, that's the same thing. It's like, well, not exactly. Anakin sympathetically was deceived, but he still chose many evil choices that obtained an objective morality of being wrong choices.
Right.
So that's not the same thing. It's like,
Right.
oh, you retconned his past, and now he's a sympathetic villain. No, it's not.
Right.
Objective truth would say murdering children is wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't feel sorry for him. He was killing Padme and children.
Right.
Thought it was terrible.
Right. I think the emotional impact can definitely add to our I think it can add to the respect for the villain because we understand what they went through to get to where they are, and I think it adds for a better story. But when I talk about like a straight villain, like we don't get a backstory on Thanos. We don't really get a backstory on a lot of these villains, but yet they are still feared.
That's true, but you also didn't try to make me feel prejudiced,
Right.
because I thought they were a villain originally.
Right.
You rewriting objective morality doesn't make me sympathize with a villain.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Wanted to talk about now. I know that I am much more sympathetic, I think, when it comes to more modern movies and that kind of thing. Do you think there have been any good villains in the past decade?
What a great question. In the past decade.
Yeah.
So that limits me to 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that those Into the Spider-Verse movies have genuinely drew me in as just someone who enjoyed good story.
Right.
Not that I'm a Marvel fan, but that was just good writing.
Yeah.
And you do have some genuine malicious villains that make the character, Miles in this case,
right,
really have to grow or wrestle. I mean, you had a pretty interesting Spider-Man No Way Home story talking about villains and the right to redeem a villain or otherwise. And then, you think about I think one of the best movies that came out recently was, Top Gun Maverick.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, did that have a villain? It really didn't. It's actually a race against time.
Right.
Even though there was fighting, that didn't mean that there was a villain.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd have to look at like a long list of movies. I'm trying to think of them off the hand, but there are a lot more movies that I liked nowadays that had great antagonists, but not great villains.
Mm-hmm.
The closest thing we got was, we got Blofeld in Spectre, and I didn't care for that. I didn't care for. Christoph Waltz did a great job, but that kind of dread that you get when Joker comes on screen, I haven't felt that for a while.
Yeah.
Not in Mission Impossible, not in any other.
I was about to ask you about Mission Impossible as well. I think like Fallout. What's his name?
The sixth one, Fallout.
Yeah. What's the villain's name? I forget. It's a shorter name.
Yeah, he's that British guy.
Yeah, let me look it up.
In the Syndicate. Lane, Solomon.
Thank you. Yeah, Solomon Lane. Like even he I think he's a fine villain, but I don't think he's anything crazy.
He was just a resourceful terrorist.
Right.
I thought Casino Royale had a pretty good villain.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That was a good one.
That one was really great. Now, I was thinking about some while I was thinking through this about some villains that I really liked. We talked about Death from Puss in Boots. I think probably one of the best villains we've seen in the past decade.
Yeah.
Which was so shocking. Like no one saw it coming. This goes back to 2014 a little bit later, but Whiplash with J.K. Simmons. Now, would you consider him a villain or an antagonist?
Would you say that again? Whiplash?
Yeah, Whiplash with J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller. The drummer movie.
No, he presented challenges.
Yeah.
For him to overcome the drummer, but he never was a villain. Okay. Even though his methods were cruel, I wouldn't say he had malicious intent because he wanted him to be a better drummer.
Yes. Okay. Now, would you consider Bucky a villain?
Bucky Barnes
in Winter Soldier. We'll talk about
Bucky Barnes by virtue of saying his name. No, Bucky Barnes is not the villain. Hydra was the villain, but he was a plot device.
Right.
His character in Winter Soldier and Civil War, they were reduced to plot devices that made Captain America have to act boldly.
Right.
Because of his, was it philia, love for his friend.
And do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so he just posed, he posed problems and tons of stumbling blocks to Captain America, but he never was a villain. He was a menace.
Yeah.
He was a menace and a troublemaker.
Yeah. And do you think, Bucky only has probably 3 or 4 lines in the whole Winter Soldier, when he's Bucky? And do you think that can add to the development of a villain being more feared and respected if they have little dialogue?
It's amazing. Brevity conveys so much, which is probably why I'm losing respect the more I talk. But the more to the point, concise, and brevetous you are, the more you naturally demand respect.
Right.
I'd love to reference what makes a villain respected for being malicious and evil is also take away the cruelty and make him a little more suave. That's what makes James Bond and Ryan Gosling in Crazy Stupid Love so attractive to the women. Because why? It's an unapologetic self-confidence.
Right.
Now take that guy and add cruelty and malice. Now he's a villain.
Yeah.
And a good villain.
Yeah. I mean,
Vader... It's funny how close those lines actually do go.
That is super interesting. It goes back to Vader and Kylo Ren, where Kylo is so much more expressive and all over the place with his dialogue, but Vader is so much more concise, and when he speaks, it's everyone listens out of respect. Kylo just was not that.
I think that the idea behind Taken was that the suave, good-looking guy is very few ticks away from becoming a very cruel individual.
Yes. Okay, question here. Ultron from Avengers, good or bad villain?
Wasted potential.
Okay.
Actually could have been great.
I agree.
I really loved where they could have taken Ultron, and in my own personal belief, that What If show, I caught one episode of it, and it happened to be the one where they said, let's combat the Ultron AI with the Hydra AI. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea.
Yeah.
I wanted to like Ultron because he had a Tony Stark personality with a lot of cruelty, but he also saw the world in a different perspective, which it says is fine. But you get into the writing of it, and the whole I'm going to drop a crater on the world and kill people.
Right.
It's why? Where did that come from? I didn't understand his motivations. As a result of that, it was hard to think it was any good. So that takes me to Mission Impossible.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
Dude, that's another AI gone haywire. Yeah. And I didn't even know what it wanted.
I agree.
Why did it want to blow up the world? Why did it want to blow up nukes?
Yeah.
John? Yeah. To live in a thing? Oh, I'm going to have to move.
There you go.
Why did the AI robot even want to blow up the world? That made no sense.
Right.
That was that was silly. To what? Live in a bunker in South Africa?
Yeah.
For the rest of its life? But in the Matrix? Watch out, fellas. But in the Matrix, those machines,
Okay, yeah.
or even the little squid machines, right?
Yeah.
I dreaded those things. I
Yeah.
dreaded Agent Smith when I watched that movie
Yeah. Yeah.
because he's so intellectually smart. You know that this guy is calculated and he doesn't care about you.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
respected him.
Having that sense of like kind of narcissism is, I think, major for a villain, because
Yeah.
as soon as we can start relating to it, I think we start to lose respect for it. You know?
Would you say that is truly the case when you look at the bad guy from Captain America Civil War who pitted them against each other?
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
Because of the hurt he experienced from his family. Take that guy, compare him to Magua from The Last of the Mohicans, who
Okay.
is wreaking havoc against the white man and John Monroe
Right.
because he lost his own family and went brokenhearted.
Right.
So that doesn't always mean that.
It's true. It's true.
Look at Scar from The Lion King.
Yeah. I was thinking that too.
Those are three villains where, and the best villains are the villains that make you wrestle with who actually is right.
Mm.
Those are the best ones, because when the Joker is telling Harvey Dent that these people are just waiting for an excuse to turn on each other and they're only as good as politicians allow them to be, it's
Right.
like, dang it, man, that is so timely. Look at how quickly our community will mob and riot something
Yeah.
if politics aligns with that theology.
Mm.
And so you're like, dang it, Joker, I don't want you to consume the city in violence, but that also seems like the most fair thing to do.
Right.
Harvey Dent was an incredible villain.
I agree. He was.
And he was a sympathetic guy. I mean, he's brokenhearted.
That's a good point. So how do we draw that line between the distinction between us relating to a villain and it becoming a sympathetic sort of respect for the villain, or like a Kylo Ren where they're trying too hard to relate? Is it the writing? Is it the performances? What is it?
Kylo Ren's relationship to the protagonist was never going to happen
Yeah.
because they wanted Rey to be some boss girl who won everything, and the writers themselves never respected Kylo Ren as a character.
Right.
He failed at everything he tried to do in the first movie. And then how do I look at film and how do I look at the writing? Well, it's like this. If the writers are trying to justify the villain's behavior by calling it subjective morality, you're not going to buy that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe even natural law written on your heart would tell you that murder is bad, regardless if you had hard childhood or not.
Right. So in the sense of the Captain America Civil War villain, right, where objectively what he's doing is obviously wrong, but the reason behind it is his family was murdered. Do you think the justification behind their actions needs to be enough for us to respect them? If that makes sense?
So, did you respect Mysterio?
No.
Well, he also felt disrespected by something the Tony Stark had done in the past. And so the revenge,
True.
or the redemption arc, as he saw it, he saw his redemption / revenge. That didn't make me respect him as a character very much.
Right.
But and we have a lot of hero versus antagonist, but for him to be a villain that's kind of hard. I mean, I watched Rocky 3. Do I think that Clubber Lang or Apollo Creed were villains? No, dude.
Yeah.
They were just the next bad guy that Rocky overcame because it was a hero's overcoming story. It was the hero's journey of overcoming something.
Yeah. Even Ivan Drago in the fourth one, same way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so subjective. That's why I think Order of the Phoenix is one of the perfect movies to convey this modem of conversation, because those are four very distinct villains that are wildly different from each other, all operating towards the same goal with very malicious intent, but carried out different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all so different. Okay, one thing I wanted to talk about. So a couple more villains I wanted to discuss. Have you've seen Django Unchained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Calvin Candy as DiCaprio, I think is incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the most terrifying villains, like just sinister villains we've seen in the 21st century. Like he's just straight up evil, and there's no redeeming factors for his personality. He's extremely racist. He's extremely violent, narcissistic. So how is it like the Joker, where there's just like no redeeming factors, and objectively he's just evil?
That's such a great question, man. I really enjoy these questions and getting to do this. What's fun is Batman has a killing rule,
Mm-hmm.
but Django doesn't.
Right.
And because Batman has a no killing rule, the tension is always how far can they push Batman
Yeah.
before he breaks a rule,
Yeah.
before he crosses an objective line. So it goes like this. For Django, who was on a pure vigilante mission, he
Mm-hmm.
didn't care about killing Leonardo DiCaprio or not. So the tension between the two of those characters wasn't much more than just, I have all the cards and you're the underdog. But with Batman, it's Joker's pushing you really hard, but you also have a code to live by.
Right.
And Batman also believes in his heart, and you can see sometimes in the comics otherwise, he thinks he can rehabilitate the Joker. So there's always that kind of
Yeah.
there's that level to their relationship, and it means something more than just a bad guy good guy clash.
Yeah.
They're the two of them are ideologies. You can't compare the two.
Yeah.
One's just an overall, he's a small dictator, while the other is an entire ideology.
Yeah.
What made the Joker better writing is he could be rehabilitated. He has no identity. You don't know where he came from. You don't know why he's that way, but you know how merciless he is. Yet, he also represents a greater idea of ideology,
Yeah.
which is an unstoppable force with lawlessness.
Mm.
And Bruce is trying to be bound law while also being a vigilante. That's
Right.
the dichotomy of his character. And therefore, he wrestles with, am I becoming who I'm trying to stop because I'm breaking the law
Right.
and doing crazy stuff? So his final justification is, as long as I don't murder, at least I'm not them.
Right. One thing about the Joker that's really cool in whenever I rewatch The Dark Knight, I mean, he contradicts himself so many times.
Yeah.
Intentionally. But
His Scar story is always different.
It's always
He
different.
lost.
But every single time, the people, the audience always buys it. Whatever he says. I think of when he's in the conference room and he's like, "It's simple. We kill the Batman." So it sounds like he wants to kill him. But then during the interrogation scene, he's like, "I don't want to. What would I do without you if I killed you?" And it's like, oh, like, so no one can read him. No one knows what he's going to do. And I think if a villain, if you could see what a villain is going to do, or like, can it, if it's like bad writing or bad storytelling, and you can see exactly what the villain wants to do and is what he's going to do, it makes it so much less entertaining.
Yeah.
Like I think of Ultron. Ultron had some of the best writing we've seen in a long time, and James Spader is just a masterpiece with that. But it's one of those things where my problem with Ultron, and I actually look upon Age of Ultron more fondly than other people, but my problem with it was there was far too much humor to try and counteract the evilness that was behind Ultron.
Yeah.
Far too much. It's just, I didn't watch Love and Thunder, but I heard it was the same way. Where it was like, we have some big actors being villains here, Bale being a villain, but the build up for the storyline, the build up to the villain was purely based off comedy, and the scenes that made Ragnarok so great were just gone because the director tried to go this route that would make money instead of making an actual good villain.
It's a shame, and I wish I could have remembered to bring that up. For you to have watched the first 20 minutes of Love and Thunder would have shown that Christian Bale was an acolyte of sorts that worshipped a god. I forgot the god's name. And he was praying that his daughter would be healed from her sickness, and she died. And then he stumbles across that god in the woods and sees, oh my gosh, you were just sitting here eating fruit, lounging on your seat, and you didn't heal my daughter after I followed you for my whole life. I was devoted to you. And then he takes the God Killer sword and he kills the god, and he's like, I'm going to kill all the gods because they're all corrupt. And it actually, funny enough, made him such a sympathetic villain because he swore his whole life to an ideology that that he felt betrayed by, and
Yeah.
he took vengeance for his daughter dying from it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's one of the best Marvel villains we've had in a long time.
Yeah.
But the movie didn't live up to it, I'm afraid.
Okay. That's good to know.
He was a great villain.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting is people, and especially that the critical drinker, he talks a lot about how a lot of these villains we were growing up were great, right? And so my question is, and this goes on with just movies as well, are villains that have a lot of nostalgia, are they actually good? Or is it nostalgia that's kind of clouding our mind into believing that they're as good as they once
And
were?
so that's a great note to say about that. You can refer to the movie John Wick.
Yeah.
John Wick is an insanely popular movie. It's insanely popular. Who's the villain of the first movie? You don't really know, but
No.
here's what you do know. You know they killed his dog.
Yeah.
And what does the villain do? He sits and sort of plays video games till he gets assassinated.
Right. Right.
But here's what that means. But what it produced in John Wick, the reaction from John Wick because of what that villain did for 5 minutes, killing his dog and then crashing the windshield of his car, the production of the protagonist, the reaction of the protagonist from those actions showed how it made such an iconic revenge story.
Yeah.
It should be just like a puppy. That's what he says. It doesn't make any sense. But then they say, no, this is going to produce a horrific outcome.
Yeah.
And it was such a horrific outcome that it lives in infamy in your mind.
Yeah.
It's not a Joker level villain, but look what it produced in the protagonist.
Yeah.
And that's what endeared the story to you.
Mm-hmm. So would you say, in a similar vein, like people, and I would agree, Darth Vader is one of the best villains of all time.
Yeah.
But do you think I mean, this is a hard question to ask, but if this Star Wars came out, if let's say, for just comedic purposes, the sequels 7, 8, and 9 came out, were the original 4, 5, and 6, and then the original 4, 5, and 6 came out now.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be the same conversation where it would be like,
So
Kylo Ren's a terrible villain?
Let's see what that brought out in the protagonist. Rey, who I'll just say I didn't care for the writing of Rey. She learned the Force easily. All right, so you and I are on the same page.
Yeah.
What did Kylo Ren produce Rey to do? What kind of extents was she pushed to? What kind of things did she have to wrestle with? Nothing.
Right.
And that's why she wasn't endearing, and that's why the story wasn't endearing.
Yeah.
It was about Rey. It wasn't about Kylo Ren. It was about Rey.
Yeah.
And now here we are, and let's look at the originals. They were about Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Look what Darth Vader made Luke feel, the range of emotion Luke had to feel, and the things he had to overcome to even defeat Vader. And then also, the trick of it being, Vader wanted him to defeat him so that he would tap into his rage.
Yeah.
So that, and then the beautiful part, and I think it was conveyed awesome in his costume, he wore all black.
Yeah.
And then at the end, the fold flaps down from his shirt and it's white.
Yeah.
Showing it's like, hey, I might have given into my rage, but I'm not going to fall to the dark side. And the cool thing that we got as viewers and audience members, which is what endeared us to Luke Skywalker from the 79 all the way to now, was what Luke had to overcome in the face of such evil was what made Star Wars endearing.
Yeah.
Not what Kylo Ren provoked out of Rey, which honestly, dude, was little to nothing.
Yeah.
He would just walk in a room and he would throw a little fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it was so undoing. It's like watching a guy who's like really buff and really strong talk about his body fat percentage and talk about his reps outside the gym. It's like, hey, dude, that's just kind of insecure.
Right. You're just like
it really is making me feel. It's making me feel cringy. I don't care for that.
Now this kind of reminds me of Red Skull from Captain America: First Avenger. Let's talk about him for a second, where he's barely in the movie as well. You know, that's one thing that we've been seeing with a lot of villains, where they try to. The first Captain America is just about building up the Captain America character, and I think Red Skull is a good villain, but he struggles to live up to the level of other villains. Why is that?
His equal, Captain America and Spider-Man have the same storyline.
Yeah.
And here's what it is. It's a guy who has beta tendencies.
Yeah.
He's a beta guy who gets endowed with power.
Yes.
Alpha status power.
Yeah.
That's what makes it appealing, because every guy deep down imagines, if I were more alpha, if I were given alpha male superpowers, I would be so awesome.
Yeah.
And that's why Spider-Man and Captain America are the dream for the most guys who may be a little nerdy or not too athletic.
Right.
Because all the guys who used to pick on them don't pick on them anymore.
Right.
So let's see their immediate counterparts. Their immediate counterparts are essentially Red Skull and then Green Goblin.
Yeah.
Continuing the juxtaposition, I will not ever concede that Green Goblin was a better one than Red Skull. And here's why. Red Skull just pushed Captain America to fight harder.
Yeah.
And that was cool. But Green Goblin challenges Spider-Man's identity as a hero when he tells him that even though you're a hero, one day the public will be more interested in seeing you fail than be altruistic.
Yeah.
And that adds another layer of doubt that the hero overcomes. Because of the layer of doubt that he overcame, that's what endeared Spider-Man more to viewers than
Captain America.
Than the Captain America. How about that?
That's good. And I was thinking about this with Green Goblin. I mean, William Dafoe has one of the most iconic performances as Green Goblin.
He sure was.
Right?
He sure was.
Do you think it's one of those cases where if the Red Skull, and I love what's his name? The guy who
Hugo Weaving.
Thank you. I love him. He's great. But I genuinely just think, I mean, Dafoe carries that performance as Green Goblin. Do you think it's one of those cases where Dafoe makes that villain 10 times better? Just like Joker. Obviously, the writing for both Joker and Dafoe are great as well, but their performances carry that to the summit of what they're seen as villains. Do you think that would be the case if Red Skull had better writing or a better actor?
I do. Well, yeah, but it was two-dimensional because there wasn't a third layer of something that it made the protagonist over. You can only measure a villain by what he makes the protagonist overcome.
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker was challenged in lightsaber battles, in controlling your emotions, and then in not falling into rage.
Yes.
Those are really hard things without the lightsaber battles that I struggle with as a guy. So seeing Luke Skywalker overcome that was cool. Frodo doesn't confront Sauron, but he's confronted with the temptation of evil and power and the lust of getting what you want. Dude, that's hard. Mm-hmm. And everyone can relate to something like that, especially in addiction. But Red Skull, he only did one thing, Josh. He wanted absolute power. That was bad for the world. So Captain America had to fight extra hard to stop him from gaining absolute power.
Right.
And the only thing he produced out of Cap was, I have to push myself harder.
Yeah.
The better writing for Cap was when Bucky died.
Yeah.
And then he had to overcome the grief of losing a friend.
Right.
But other than that, and Red Skull didn't technically do that. So I wouldn't say Red Skull was a good villain. Not because he didn't have the potential to be good, but because the writing didn't give him another layer of him challenging the protagonist.
I completely agree. Yeah. Have you seen Mad Max Fury Road?
No, I haven't.
Never mind.
No, I haven't.
There's a good villain there. Okay, did you see the 2019 Joker?
No, but I know enough.
Okay, so that's one of those cases where the villain is kind of the same as the protagonist. They're both one and the same.
Yes.
Is that something that you think could make because honestly, okay, hold on. Let's come back to that in a second because I wanted to talk about.
But is he the villain? Does he himself make decisions that cause him to also grow? So that can't be right. He's a flawed protagonist. He's not a villain.
But he grows in ways that thinks he's helping himself, but in reality is tearing himself apart.
Yeah, it's a flawed protagonist. He's the protagonist because we follow him. It's his story.
Right.
But the decisions he makes are horrible decisions. That just means he's a bad guy, not that he's a villain.
Okay.
A villain was supposed to be the idea of the city at large,
Right.
the humanity at large who overlooked him.
Right.
And the crime of overlooking such a broken person pushes someone to a terrible end.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, you can't arrest people for that.
Right. Right.
So, was there a villain in Joker? Not really.
Right.
That was a tragic story of a man who is deconstructed by self doubt, frustrations, horrors, personal horrors, and a mental anguish.
Yeah.
Even though he's written to be a villain originally, in that context, he was the protagonist, but he was only a flawed protagonist.
Yeah.
You can't also be your own villain unless you're Jekyll and Hyde or Hulk and Bruce Banner.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I didn't think about
Another entity, maybe it's a psychopathic thing, kind of like Fight Club,
that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
where it was Tyler Durden, and at first he was his friend, helped him grow, became a bit antagonistic, then in the end made true villain decisions. But it's at the end of the day, it's Edward Norton.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I didn't think about Fight Club. That's good. Okay, so I think we have to talk about the new Batman because that movie flipped a lot of stereotypical ideals of the Batman character as well as the Riddler on its head, right? I thought Paul Dano crushed it as the Riddler, in my personal opinion. I thought the the difference that we see instead of this comical, you know, like humorous comic relief character that we see in a lot of different movies, it's this terrifying, selfish, doesn't care about what he does or how it affects people. And also his relationship with Batman, the conversations they have are so enticing. And I think it makes Paul Dano's Riddler extremely compelling, extremely entertaining. And also, like, it's one of those things we have no idea what he's thinking, who he is, where he came from, what he does, and yet he's driving the protagonist throughout the movie.
Well, I'm not going to disagree because I'm not thinking enough about it right now. What did he do? What the Riddler did was find very overt ways to expose people,
Right.
and expose hidden sins. And in a way, he kind of was like Mr. Silver from Skyfall,
Okay, yeah.
who was a ghost from the past for a lot of politicians who used terrorism to make them confess about shady stuff they did in the past.
Yeah.
Which also is what Skyfall was about.
Mhm.
That's why Bond had to stop him. That's why Batman has to stop him.
Right.
I don't remember anything that made me think the Riddler is doing this specifically to spite Batman more than he is doing this to defame public officials.
Well, I think when they're having that conversation in the jail cell, I haven't seen it since it came out, so I might have to refresh my memory here.
I don't even remember them talking very much except for that scene.
I just remember in the jail scene when he is like begging Batman to not leave. And so the whole motive behind his direction of chaos throughout the movie is to keep Batman in this constant chase with him. It kind of reminded me, I don't think he's as good as Joker, but Heath Ledger is doing so many things just to entice Batman closer and closer and closer to him,
Yes, I think that Batman gave validation to Riddler's paranoia. And what makes Batman villains believable is that our protagonist is dressing up like a bat.
Yeah.
So that's really silly. It's a conversation that's best exemplified in Gordon and Batman in Batman Begins.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, so what about escalation? He says, what do you mean? He says, we carry semi-automatics, they buy automatics. We buy bulletproof vests, they buy armor-piercing rounds. And Batman goes, so what? He's like, you're dressing up like a bat, jumping off rooftops. How much more paranoia is that really going to validate for other people?
Yeah.
Because Batman is also kind of psychotically nuts, to dress up like a bat and push fear as an initiative to clean up the streets, he also is semi-responsible for the justification of mentally sick people to do that with violence.
Yeah.
So I tell you that Batman and the Riddler only felt validated because Batman's also kind of nuts. I didn't think that they had a very good relationship.
And I hope they unpack it more in the second one, because I do think Paul Dano's performance was very good.
Yeah, he did a very good job.
He did. And so
Created intrigue.
Yeah. And yeah. But I wanted to, before we kind of close, I wanted to ask you, because I've been asking a lot of questions here. I wanted to see what you had to say about some of this stuff, if you had any like questions you wanted to unpack or things you wanted to talk about.
Going outside of superhero movies.
Yeah.
Can rom-coms, can teenage girl dramas, can those girls be, are they malicious enough to be villains? Are bullying movies? Is Carrie, was she bullied by a villain, or was it just a bully? You know, I said a villain has to have malicious intent behind decisive decision makings under cruelty. Well, that could be a school bully, but it's hard to say that a school bully is a villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and what do you think about that in other forms where it's not clear, like in Mean Girls?
Yeah, I was thinking Mean Girls.
Do you think that Lindsay Lohan and who's the girl from The Notebook?
Freaking Rachel McAdams. Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel McAdams. Do you think she's a villain?
I don't think she's a villain. Because that's a really good question. Okay, let's go to Carrie real quick, because I love that movie, first of all. I think it's extremely well done. But man, I would say that in Carrie that she is the villain for sure. Because she brings out this entire completely different character within Carrie. Completely. Throughout the movie. But it seems like this ticking time bomb within Carrie that's waiting to explode because of her family situation, because no one seems to look at her or see her or anything. But then as soon as, it's just kind of like I don't know.
So I guess the way that we answer that question is by asking another. Does the villain's motivation and decision making have to be solely their own? Or can they be influenced by another in making those decisions? What that could look like is clearly the villain in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is Solomon Lane.
Yeah.
When he puts the bomb vest on another human being to go do his dirty work, that person doesn't become a villain, even though their decisions are cruel. Or technically does it in the world of story narrative.
Right.
In that scene, they might be a villain, but knowing that they're a pawn of somebody else, does that justify them from a villain status? Because they're an obstacle. Right. They're cruel.
Yeah.
What made Jason Isaacs a very good villain in The Patriot was that he was scolded by his superiors for being brutal.
Yeah.
Cornwallis of the British Redcoats said, "You're being cruel and insane." That took him from being more than a soldier on the opposing team to actually being a villain.
Yeah.
He didn't have to make those decisions in the rules of war. He made them for brutal, violent tactics.
Yeah.
That made him a villain, even though it was justifiable killing in war.
Yeah.
But that it opens an interesting question for who do we define as our villains in movies? Did Rachel McAdams become a villain in Mean Girls because other girls pushed her to be a bully and she had to get them back? Or at the beginning of the movie when she just wanted to be mean and selfish, was that her just being a flawed supporting actress, or was she being cruel on purpose to be a villain? And that's where writing gets fun,
Yeah.
because she clearly is the antagonist, but you don't know if she tiptoed that line into villain, even though she's the one that makes cruel decisions.
Right, because Rachel McAdams' character throughout the whole first half of the movie is literally just to develop Lindsay
She
Lohan's
creates
character
drama.
to
Yeah.
be a worse person, a
Yeah.
more horrible person. So would that be a villain? I would say she's more of an antagonist that stirs up a different side effect of a character we see.
All right. I agree.
There was one I wanted to talk about. I forgot what it was though. Shoot, I just slipped my head. It'll probably come back to me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What movie do you end up rooting for the villain?
Rooting for the villain. I mean, then we'd have to ask the question of like, then either the protagonist is completely flawed in the writing, or if the point of the director is to in order to side with the villain, it has to have an emotional impact involved with it that the audience can relate to.
Okay.
And there's very few that have done that.
It'd be interesting to pose that to a bunch of Christians.
Yeah.
And say, when you watch the Passion of the Christ, do you see the Roman soldiers as villains or as fulfilling a prophecy? Okay. And you're actually like, hey, this has to happen for something great.
Right.
So that's kind of a weird way to think about it.
That is interesting. I think I can appreciate it though. Like I think of Infinity War. One of my favorite things about Infinity War is turning a movie on its stereotypical head. Instead of having the villain lose, Thanos wins. Yeah. And I think that makes it so much more compelling. And what makes Infinity War so great is this Marvel has this stigma of being cliche and,
cookie cutter.
Exactly. And so to do that, it gave me a lot more respect for the Russo brothers to make that. Obviously, it is comic accurate, but for them to do it in such a great way and seeing the heroes that we love so distraught and yet it be so well done. Like typically when a villain wins or like heroes are seen as weak, people don't like that.
But it was somehow satisfying to see such a major loss.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. And then continue with that, put a pin in that. I thought that No Way Home, I didn't care for that whole every one of Spider-Man's rogue gallery is just an unrehabilitated guy. It's like, are you kidding me?
Wait, what are you talking about?
Remember, he goes through and he has the Lizard, Electro, Doc Ock. And I'll give it to you. Dr. Octavius is the only one who actually could have technically, in my mind, been rehabilitated. He had an AI controlling his body. Everyone else, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx chose to make those decisions.
Yeah.
The Lizard, Dr. Connors, chose to make cruel decisions.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like, they did this whole thing where it was like all of Spider-Man's villains, every single one of them, is just a misunderstood guy who just accidentally was seen as a bad guy. It's like, really?
That's really well said. Yeah.
They made those choices in Sandman. Oh, Sandman's not really a bad guy.
Right.
It wasn't his fault. He chose to steal and to attack people.
Right. There's not.
That wasn't something you need to rehabilitate, and that's my problem, Josh. That was a heart problem.
Yeah.
Thanos had a heart problem. I'd tell you. He also had another problem. But in Infinity War, he was, justified through the logical idea that he's defending Earth and every other planet. The Spider-Man villains, they just need to be rehabilitated. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
They all were antagonists and villains because they made those decisions.
Yeah. I think one thing in No Way Home that is pretty good is the fight between Spider-Man and Green Goblin at the end. Where
that's his Luke and Vader moment of will I turn evil or not?
Right. Tobey Maguire stops him because it's like, this is not
gonna help you.
In fact, it's gonna turn you the opposite way, right? It's just gonna lead to more That's a really good point. Yeah. I'm trying to think of this villain I wanted to talk about. I forget. Can't remember.
Well, I'm sure we'll do another one of these.
Yeah.
Bring it up.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we close?
No, everything we want to talk about, we talked through, and really great points.
Yeah. Well, guys, that was a in-depth discussion about the evolution of villains. I think we'll be back next week with Luke to talk about. I'm going to be making a bracket of some of the most iconic characters in movies and action movies, and have a discussion with us three about who would come out as the victorious winner in a 32 set bracket. So we will be back next week with that. But until then, Sam, thanks for being on here, man.
Thank you very much. I love talking about movies. I think this is fantastic.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, we'll see y'all next week.
Thank you.